Knowing who you are and what you're capable of is one of the most powerful pieces of knowledge you will ever encounter and that you can ever get. Now, let me make sense of that, okay? So we know that I am, as in the phrase, is a form of awareness, right? And that this awareness creates. It's also consciousness. You can also say God is I am, or you can say, the Creator is I am, or Jesus Christ is I am, the imagination is I am, right? There are all kinds of different nicknames you can get, source, whatever it is that you're comfortable with, okay? But when you begin to grasp what is being said, one, I think you will have to agree that you want to be more responsible with what you're putting on after I am. And it is like a putting on. It is like a clothing. I mean, Neville talks about wearing a suit. It's like wearing a suit and getting used to it. The Bible uses the esoteric word robe, right? It's putting on something. I mean, Paul says it's putting on something, right? And so it's this idea of wearing. But what are you wearing? So when we break down what the I and the am are, then you begin to realize, oh crap, like I need to be way more articulate. And when I say articulate, I mean, I need to be aware of what I'm saying in here, not only out here, but in here, right? It's, God, the awareness, looks after not after appearances, but after your heart, which is another way of saying your feelings, your interpretations, your reactions, your beliefs, right? And so when you look at the I of the I am, okay, you're looking at something that's formless. So that's awareness itself, consciousness, God, whatever it is but that's in you. That's within you, called the imagination, okay? It is not separate from you. You are not somehow sitting there and hanging out with it in your car and it's sitting there in your driver's seat. It is part of you. Okay. You can call it your soul, whatever it is that you're comfortable with trying to understand this. Okay. But that there is a part of you, and this part of you is more powerful than the ego self, right? And you see this also in the esoteric language, in the relationship that you see in scripture between Jesus and his cousin, John the Baptist, where in one moment he says, listen, I must decrease so he can increase. And so that is yet another technique that you can see even used in scripture about how to use this thing called the law, right? Which is we must decrease the ego, the label self, that's what I call it, right? The person with names and who likes to label things and categorize things and, socially be aware of everything that's going on in social media and all this kind of stuff. That person must decrease so that the inner self, and that's my favorite word for this being, right, is increasing in power, okay? Because even when you don't, all you're doing is you're sitting on that power. So all you're doing is when you're not aware of who you are, when you're not aware that you're a divine person, right? Which there's a lot of people that aren't, they're not really tapping into this potential. And so they're sitting on this power, looking outside of themselves, waiting for power to come. They're waiting for the perfect job, waiting for the perfect person, waiting to feel loved, waiting to feel wealthy, whatever it is. And so when you do that, you give up your power, right? So what you're doing though, and let's be clear here, is that you are forming the I. So the I is, this is a really crude example, but the I is more like Play-Doh, okay? Or like an unchiseled statue, right? And so like the David, right? The David before it was the David statue I'm referring to, okay? And so it was a formless just blob of marble, right? And then you begin chiseling and shaping, and that's what we get to do. We get to shape and chisel away things that we don't want in our life. And we get to do this actively, right? And we do get to do it. It's something that we get to do. You don't have to do it. You can live the life that you're living for the next 50, 70, 80, 90, 150 years, however long you live, but you get to live it the way that you want. And that's why I said, realizing who this is and what this is and who is working behind the scenes, really, is your own consciousness, is the inner self, is Jesus Christ, is God, is love, whatever you want to call it again, right? The reason why I come back to that is because I'm not trying to impose any belief systems on you. It's super important that you define what it is, not me, right? Because everybody has their own beliefs around certain words, like God and all this kind of stuff, right? It's like totally loaded historical violence and all of this kind of stuff. And that's some of my experience with that word, right? Because I grew up in the church and as a pastor and as a teacher and all of this kind of stuff, right? And so for me, I don't use the word God because I don't connect with the word God, okay? Not in the same way that other people might connect with it. I like the word creator. I like the word inner self, right? Because the inner self is, then you are also reminded that it's part of you. It isn't some part like that's outside of you, which is yet another thing that people correlate with the word God, right? And so that's why you'll always hear me say that in a lot of my videos, because I'm trying to encourage you to think of, okay, how am I going to define this being as the most powerful thing, but also part of me, right? Paul uses this very romantic term in Greek, which is saying we're co-creators, right? We actually influence one another. Okay. And that's very, very powerful. So that's what's going on with the I and then the am. So the am is basically everything. So I am rich, right? So rich is a descriptive, like a describing word, right? Like an adjective. Okay. It can be a verb as well, by the way. It's called a gerund. Sorry. I had to go grammar Nazi on that. So, all right. So what it is though, is you are ultimately with the I, which is formless. That's this being, right, of love. It's formless. And all it does, though, is it takes on everything you put on after the am, okay? I am. So am is also aware of. That's really what you're saying. So I, this being, is now aware of being rich. So am is the being or awareness, if you want to use that. So this I, this God, this thing is now being this way. So if you're like, for example, stuck in a victim role, so it's like God is being a victim, or the inner self is powerless. The inner self is poor. Whatever it is, you are saying and stating and claiming as true of this being who is formless is now taking on the form of whatever it is that you claim. Okay, you're not only giving this thing that doesn't really have an identity in the sense that we understand what it is, right? You're now giving it all of the contours and shaping and describing words and verbs and all of this kind of stuff, right? The activity of what it means to experience that. Okay, so again, every time you are going out and telling other people about the stories that oh my gosh, the atrocious things that you've experienced in your life, and you may even be telling the stories to get money off of it. Maybe you're writing books about it, all of this kind of stuff, and you're wondering why you're still living the same story. Well, look at the paper trail. Look at the mental trail, right, that you are leaving. And that's what Neville refers to as your inner conversations. It's really a mental trail of thoughts that you're leaving in your own wake, which means, after you have left that scene, after you've left that experience, after you've left that relationship, whatever it is, what you keep thinking about, okay? And that's what I refer to as the mental wake, okay? And so you need to be aware of these things. And being aware of them is being active. But really my challenge to you, and that's what this was all about, is that you now need to be responsible. Like, you can't go blame other people for how you're thinking, feeling, and reacting and responding to. Because if you know what you're doing with the I and the am, and then whatever you put after that, then you have to know that you are the most powerful being that ever lived. And that you can't go around blaming other people, because then that means you're giving your power away. You being a victim doesn't help you get out of being a victim, right? And so you stopping being the victim is the moment of your salvation, is the moment that you free yourself. That's what I want for you, and you should want it for yourself.